My name is Harold Matthews, and I never thought I'd live to see the day when my own son would look me in the eye and say the words that shattered my heart. It was Christmas Eve. The lights outside were glowing, the fireplace was crackling, and my old hands were shaking as I handed gifts to my grandchildren. For a moment I felt alive, like the sacrifices of my entire life had been worth it. Then Daniel, my only son, leaned toward me and said something I will never forget. "Dad, don't expect me to take care of you when you're old. Honestly, you should already be planning for a nursing home. Do you know what it feels like when the floor is ripped out from under you?" That's what I felt. My breath caught in my throat. I thought maybe he was joking. Maybe he had one too. Many drinks at the dinner table. But no, his eyes were serious, cold, almost annoyed, as if I was some weight dragging him down. I tried to laugh it off. "That's not funny, son." But Daniel folded his arms, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "I'm not joking. Raising me was your responsibility, not a favor. Don't expect me to owe you anything for it." Those words, they burned. They carved into my chest like a knife. Here was the boy I had worked double shifts for, the boy I went hungry for so he could eat, the boy I stayed up all night comforting when he was sick. My boy. And now he was a grown man, telling me I was nothing but an obligation he had already paid off. The room grew so quiet that I swear I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My daughter-in-law lowered her gaze to her phone, pretending she hadn't heard. My grandkids were laughing, playing with their new toys, completely innocent to the storm that had just ripped through my soul. I sat there, staring at the fire, and something inside me changed. My entire life, I had given everything. My money, my health, my youth, all to build a future for Daniel. But in that moment I realized he didn't see me as a father. He saw me as a burden. And do you know what happens when a man realizes he has given his heart to someone who doesn't value it? Something dark takes root. That night, sitting by the fire, I felt the first seed of revenge plant itself deep inside me. I didn't say a word to Daniel. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I just smiled a weak smile and nodded. Because sometimes silence is louder than anger. But in my mind, I whispered a promise to myself. If I don't belong in his future, then neither will my sacrifice. You might be wondering how a father gets to this point, how a son can look at the man who raised him and speak such cruel words. Let me take you back, because only then will you understand why those words broke me and why they later fueled my revenge. I grew up with nothing. My parents were poor farmers, and I started working when I was 12 years old. By the time Daniel was born, I had already learned the meaning of struggle. I worked in a factory, long, grueling hours, 12 to 14 a day. The machines roared so loudly I could barely hear myself think, but I endured it. Why? Because every time I thought of giving up, I remembered the little boy waiting at home, the boy who looked at me with wide eyes and called me Dad. I missed birthdays, I missed school plays, I missed countless dinners, not because I didn't care, but because I was out there earning every cent that kept food on the table, clothes on Daniel's back and a roof over our heads. While other men my age went fishing on weekends or drank beers with their buddies, I was working overtime, swallowing my pride, breaking my back. There were nights when I'd come home so exhausted I couldn't even take off my boots. I would just collapse into the chair, dirt and sweat still clinging to me. And then, like a ray of light, Daniel would run up, climb onto my lap and hug me. That hug made everything worth it. That hug was my fuel. When he wanted to go to college, I didn't hesitate. I didn't have savings, not really. But I worked extra shifts, picked up odd jobs, even sold the watch my father left me just so Daniel wouldn't feel the shame of being the poor kid. I wanted him to have everything I never had. I still remember the day he graduated. I was standing in the crowd, my chest puffed with pride. Tears blurred my vision as he walked across the stage. In that moment I thought, all the pain, all the hunger, all the years I lost, it was worth it. But here's the cruel thing about sacrifices. If the person you're sacrificing for never acknowledges them, they turn into scars. Daniel never asked me about the nights I went hungry so he could eat. He never knew that I patched the same pair of work boots 3 times because I couldn't afford new ones while paying for his textbooks. He never cared that the grey in my hair and the ache in my bones came years earlier than they should have. He took it all, every opportunity, every dollar, every sacrifice, as if it was owed to him. And I never complained, not once, because that's what fathers do, or so I thought. But on Christmas Eve, when he told me not to expect him to take care of me, all those memories came flooding back. Suddenly, every sacrifice I had ever made felt like a cruel joke. I had given my all, and in return I was nothing more than an obligation, a burden. Do you know what that does to a man? It hollows him out. It makes him question the meaning of every choice he ever made. And then, quietly, it sparks something dangerous. Because for the first time in my life, I asked myself, why should he inherit the life I bled to build if he sees me as worthless? That Christmas night I barely slept. The house was full of laughter. Carols played faintly on the radio, and my grandchildren were tearing open wrapping paper, squealing with joy. But I sat in silence, staring at the flickering fire, my chest heavy with words I didn't dare speak aloud. I kept replaying Daniel's sentence in my head. Raising me was your responsibility, not a favor. Do you know how it feels to hear your life's work reduced to nothing more than responsibility? Like everything you gave was simply expected, like your sacrifices were worthless. I wanted to shout at him. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and scream, "Do you have any idea what I went through for you?" But I didn't. Instead, I sat there and smiled weakly, as if his words hadn't already crushed me. And in that silence, something changed inside me. For 70 years I had been the provider, the protector, the man who gave everything and asked for nothing. But sitting in that chair, I realized something. I had been playing the fool. I thought of the house Daniel lived in. Mine. I had worked 3 decades to pay the mortgage, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Every time I made a payment, I told myself, this is for him, for his future. I thought of the savings account, the one I had been adding to for years, a fund that Daniel believed would someday be his. I thought of the will tucked safely in my desk drawer, where his name was written in black ink beside every asset, every account, every piece of land I owned. And then I asked myself the question that would haunt me all night: why should he get any of it? What right does a son who looks at his father as a burden have to inherit the blood and sweat of that father's life? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I had built everything not just with my hands, but with my pain, my broken back, my worn hands, my empty stomach. Every dollar had come from some piece of me I'd sacrificed. And if Daniel couldn't value me, then he had no claim to what I built. It was in that quiet, firelit room that I made a decision. I would change everything. My will, my inheritance, my legacy. But revenge, I realized, isn't about rage. It isn't about shouting or fighting. Real revenge is silent, patient. It comes when the betrayer least expects it, when he's certain the world is his. I knew Daniel believed he would inherit it all. The house, the savings, the land. He thought he was entitled to it, as if my life's work were nothing but his birthright. And that belief, that blind arrogance, would make the shock all the more devastating when the truth came to light. That night, as the last embers in the fireplace died out, I whispered to myself, if he sees me as nothing, then he will inherit nothing. And for the first time in years, despite the ache in my chest, I smiled. Not the weak smile of a broken man, but the sharp, quiet smile of a man who had just begun to plan his revenge. The very next week, I drove to my lawyer's office. Snow still clung to the sidewalks and the cold air bit through my coat, but inside I was burning with purpose. Mr. Reynolds, my attorney of 20 years, looked surprised to see me. "Harold," he said warmly, "I thought we'd already finalized everything with your will last summer." I nodded. "We did, but people change, don't they?" He studied me for a moment, as if he could see through the thin smile stretched across my face. "What's on your mind?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I want to remove Daniel Matthews as my primary heir." The silence that followed was heavy. Reynolds blinked, adjusted his glasses, and finally said, "That's a big decision." "Harold, are you sure?" I didn't hesitate. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Piece by piece I laid it out, the house, the savings, the land, everything Daniel thought was already his. I reassigned it, some to charities I believed in, some to close friends who had stood by me, and a large portion to my granddaughter Lily, Daniel's own daughter, the only one who had ever shown me genuine love without expecting anything in return. As Reynolds drew up the documents, I felt lighter, as if every stroke of his pen was erasing years of being taken for granted. Weeks passed and Daniel remained smug, oblivious to what I had done. He still called only when he needed something. He still spoke to me with that air of superiority, that unspoken, "You owe me." And all the while I carried my secret like a loaded weapon, hidden but ready. I didn't need to shout at him. I didn't need to curse or fight. My revenge was already written, in legal ink, sealed and signed. One day, I imagined, Daniel would sit in Reynolds' office after my passing, expecting to hear about his inheritance. He'd lean back in his chair, probably with that same careless smile he always wore when he thought the world was his. And then, when Reynolds read the truth, I imagined the color draining from his face. No house, no savings, no land, nothing. And in that moment, my silence would speak louder than any argument we'd ever had. You see, revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in quiet, calculated decisions. Sometimes it comes in the form of a pen scratching across paper. Daniel thought he had broken me that Christmas with his words. But what he didn't know was that he had created a different version of me. A father no longer blind with devotion, but clear-eyed and cold. And when the day comes that he learns the truth, he will finally understand the cost of his arrogance. He will know what it feels like to lose everything. Just as he made me feel when he looked me in the eye and said I was nothing. That will be my final gift to him, my silence, my absence, and the inheritance he will never receive. For 70 years, I gave him everything, but in the end, I will give him nothing. Do you know what's worse than being betrayed by your own blood? It's pretending day after day that nothing happened. After Christmas, Daniel barely called me. Weeks passed, and the phone never rang. I told myself maybe he was busy with work, maybe he was caught up in his own life. But deep down, I knew the truth. He simply didn't care. Every night, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, staring at the road, waiting for headlights that never appeared. Waiting for a knock on the door that never came. Do you know how humiliating it feels to realize your son doesn't even think you're worth a 5-minute visit? And yet, the world kept moving. The neighbors waved at me, the mail arrived every morning, and I smiled politely at everyone. They didn't know that behind my smile my heart was rotting. Sometimes I blamed myself. Maybe I had spoiled him. Maybe I had given him too much, made life too easy. Maybe if I had let him struggle, he would have learned the value of sacrifice. But then I remembered, children who love their parents don't need to be taught gratitude. It's natural, it's instinct. But Daniel, he wasn't like that anymore. He wasn't the little boy who once ran to me with scraped knees and tears in his eyes. He was a man now, cold and sharp, who saw me only as an obligation. And so I made a promise to myself, if he could treat me like a burden in life, then I would treat him like a stranger in death. The will was already changed. The papers were signed. But something inside me still burned. Changing the inheritance was revenge, yes, but it wasn't enough. I didn't just want to take away his future. I wanted him to feel it, to watch his arrogance collapse brick by brick while he was still alive. That's when an idea began to form in my mind. A dangerous idea. I had lived 70 years playing the role of the quiet father, the provider, the man who smiled and gave without asking for anything in return. But now I would become something else. I would become the storm Daniel never saw coming. And it all started with one simple step, teaching him what life looks like when the support he took for granted is ripped away. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself, it's time he learns what it feels like to be abandoned. When you're old, people assume you're powerless. They see your shaky hands, your slow steps, your wrinkled skin, and they think you can't touch their lives anymore. Daniel thought the same. He thought I was just a fragile old man sitting in a chair waiting for death, but what he forgot is this: I still hold the pen that writes his future. I started small, subtle. He had been using my house like it was his, throwing parties, hosting his friends, even inviting colleagues over without asking me. I didn't say a word. Instead, I went down to the county office and quietly filed paperwork that would ensure the house was no longer under his name as beneficiary. From that moment on, he had no claim to the roof he thought was guaranteed. Then came the mortgage. You see, Daniel's own home, the fancy one with the two-car garage and the shiny lawn ornaments, was still partly tied to me. Years ago, when he couldn't qualify for the loan alone, I co-signed it. He never thanked me, not once. He acted like it was his right. So one chilly February morning, I called the bank. "Cancel the automatic payments," I said calmly. The woman on the other end hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? That could put the account holder at risk of foreclosure." I smiled to myself. "Yes, I'm sure." For the first time in years, I felt a rush of power. My son had looked me in the eye and said I was nothing. Now, with a single phone call, I reminded him I was everything. The fallout didn't take long. That evening, Daniel stormed into my house, his face red with rage. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the silence burn him alive. "The bank called me," he snapped. "They said the payment stopped. Do you realize what you've done?" I looked at him, calm as stone, and replied, "I simply stopped taking care of what isn't mine." His jaw dropped. For once, he didn't have a quick comeback. He wasn't expecting resistance. He wasn't expecting me to push back. That moment was priceless. It wasn't just about money. It was about watching his arrogance crack, watching the control slip from his hands. But this was only the beginning. I wanted him to feel insecure, restless, afraid. I wanted him to realize that every piece of stability he thought he owned had roots in me. And I was about to pull those roots out one by one. I leaned closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "You thought I was nothing, Daniel, but now you'll learn what nothing really feels like." The fallout was even sweeter than I imagined. A week after I cancelled the mortgage payments, Daniel's perfect little world began to crack. The bank sent him warning letters. His wife, Emily, was furious. She stormed out of their house and came straight to mine, her face pale with worry. "Harold," she pleaded, "please talk to the bank. Daniel is under so much pressure." I looked at her kindly, but my words were sharp. "Emily, pressure is what builds strength. Maybe it's time Daniel learns that." She didn't argue after that. Maybe she saw in my eyes that the gentle father-in-law she once knew was gone. Meanwhile, Daniel's arrogance started to slip. He still tried to act tough, but I could see the panic in his eyes when he spoke. His voice cracked. His shoulders sagged. For the first time in his life, my son felt what it meant to stand on unsteady ground, and I wasn't done. The second strike came with his car. He drove a flashy, expensive vehicle, a symbol of his pride. But what he forgot was that years ago, when his credit was poor, I co-signed that loan too. All it took was one phone call, and suddenly, his shiny toy was on the brink of repossession. I'll never forget the look on his face when the repo truck showed up outside his house. He shouted, cursed, tried to negotiate with the driver. But, in the end, they drove off with his precious car while the neighbors watched. His pride was hooked up to chains and dragged down the street. And I stood at my window, watching from a distance, a quiet smile on my lips. You see, revenge isn't just about destruction. It's about revelation. I wanted Daniel to see what he had ignored all these years, that the foundation of his success wasn't his own hard work, but mine. Every paycheck he earned, every luxury he enjoyed, every piece of stability he clung to, it had all been tied to me. And now I was cutting the strings. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a fit. I simply pulled back what was mine, and his life began to collapse under its own weight. Late one night, he showed up at my door again, this time not angry, just broken. His eyes were red. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Dad," he whispered, I need help." For a moment, I almost caved. That old instinct to protect him, to comfort him, tugged at my heart. But then I remembered Christmas. I remembered his words. Raising me was your responsibility, not a favor. So I looked him in the eyes and said the coldest words I had ever spoken in my life. Son, my responsibility ended years ago. Now, you're on your own. He stood there, stunned, as if he didn't recognize me anymore. But I knew the truth. He wasn't looking at a weak old man anymore. He was staring at the father he had underestimated, the father who finally decided to teach him a lesson. The night Daniel came begging at my door, I could see the boy he once was flicker for just a moment in his tired eyes. But that flicker didn't last. By morning his arrogance returned, and with it, his assumption that I would eventually bail him out like I always had. He still hadn't learned. So I gave him the final lesson of part 2 of my plan. I called my lawyer, Mr. Reynolds. Again. It's time to activate the trust, I said. The trust was something Daniel didn't even know existed. Years ago, when I set up my estate, I created a backup plan, a safety net for emergencies. But instead of Daniel, I placed Lily, my granddaughter, as the beneficiary. The sweet girl had always shown me more kindness than her father ever did. She listened when I spoke, she visited without asking for money, and she hugged me like she actually cared whether I was alive. Now, I decided it was time she got what she deserved. Within weeks, the transfer was complete. Lily now controlled funds Daniel thought were his. And when the bills piled up at his doorstep, when the mortgage notices turned red, and when the repo man took more than just his car, Daniel turned to his daughter for help. That was the sweetest twist of all. Imagine the look on his face when Lily told him gently but firmly, "Dad, Grandpa trusted me with this, not you." Daniel stormed into my house again, his face pale, his voice trembling with rage. "You gave everything to her," he spat. "To your granddaughter. What about me? I'm your son." I stood tall, my voice steady as stone. "Being my son is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. And you failed it," he shouted, cursed, even slammed his fist on my table. But none of it mattered. The power had shifted. For the first time in his life, Daniel was powerless, and I was untouchable. Still, I wasn't blind. I could see the desperation in his eyes growing darker each day. A man like Daniel, cornered and stripped of his pride, can become dangerous. He began making threats, muttering about how I'd regret this, how I couldn't live forever. And maybe that was true. I was 70 years old and my time on this earth was limited. But what Daniel didn't know was that I had already written the ending of this story. Every signature, every sealed envelope, every hidden plan ensured that when I was gone, my revenge would still burn. As he slammed the door behind him that night, I sat alone in the quiet house, my heart pounding. For the first time, I felt something, new fear, not for myself but for Lily. Because Daniel wasn't done fighting and neither was I, this was no longer just about inheritance, it was about survival. I always thought revenge would bring me peace, that once I stripped Daniel of his entitlement, once I cut the strings he had used to climb through life, I would finally be free of the anger that poisoned me. But peace never came. Instead, it was replaced by something else. Fear. It started small. A broken window in my shed one morning. I brushed it off as an accident. Then came the phone calls, silence on the other end whenever I answered, the line cutting off just as I spoke. And then one night, I found muddy footprints on my porch. Knew whose they were. Daniel wasn't just angry anymore, he was dangerous. A man with nothing to lose becomes a man capable of anything. His job had put him on probation. The bank threatened foreclosure, and the shiny pride he used to wear, like armor, was stripped away in front of the whole neighborhood. And in his eyes, all of it was my fault. I wasn't naive. I knew he hated me now. But hate from a distance is one thing, hate with desperation is another. Lily visited me one Sunday, her gentle smile trying to hide the worry etched on her face. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "Dad's been saying strange things. He told me you ruined his life. He even said he wished you were gone." Her words sank into me like ice. For a moment I wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be fine. But how could I? Daniel's threats weren't just empty anymore. I could see the storm building behind his hollow eyes every time he showed up at my door. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out the sealed folder Mr. Reynolds had helped me prepare the final set of instructions, the documents that would make sure Daniel never saw a dime of my estate. I stared at the folder for a long time. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the realization of what this had become. This wasn't about inheritance anymore. This was a war. I whispered into the empty room. You wanted to treat me like nothing, Daniel. But if you come for me, I'll make sure you lose everything. The fire inside me burned brighter, but so did the shadow of dread, because deep down I knew Daniel wasn't done, and the next move he made could destroy us both. The storm finally broke one night in March. I was sitting in my armchair, half asleep with the television humming faintly, when the front door shook under a violent knock. I froze. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't Emily. I already knew who it was. I opened the door, and there he stood, Daniel. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his breath heavy with the stench of whiskey. You ruined me, he slurred, his voice cracking between rage and desperation. Do you have any idea what you've done? I didn't flinch. I did nothing but stop carrying a man who refused to walk on his own. His jaw clenched. You think you're clever, don't you? Taking the house, the car, the money, giving everything to Lily. You think that makes you strong? He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. You're a bitter old man hiding behind paperwork, but one day you won't be here to protect her, and when that day comes, everything will be mine again. My blood ran cold, not for myself, but for Lily. I steadied my voice. No, Daniel, it will never be yours again, not now, not ever. His fist slammed against the doorframe, rattling the glass. For a second, I thought he might actually hit me. But instead he stepped back, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with something darker than anger. And then he said it. You'll regret this, Dad. I swear on my life, you'll regret it. He staggered off into the night, leaving me in silence broken only by the pounding of my own heart. I locked the door and sat back down, my hands trembling. Not from fear of death, I'd lived long enough to make peace with that, but from the realization that Daniel was no longer my son. He was an enemy. That night I pulled out my notebook and began to write. Not memories, not regrets, but instructions. If anything happened to me, Lily would know what to do. She would know how to protect what I had built, and she would know the truth about the man her father had become. And then I made another decision. One final quiet strike. I called Mr. Reynolds again the next morning. There's one more change I need to make, I told him. He hesitated. Harold, you've already cut Daniel out completely. What more is there? I lowered my voice. It's not just about cutting him out anymore. It's about making sure he can never touch Lily, never touch what I've left behind. I want it locked tighter than steel. As Reynolds drafted the papers, I realized the bitter truth. My revenge had grown into something bigger than I ever imagined. This wasn't just about punishing Daniel anymore. This was about protecting my legacy from my own blood. Days passed. After Daniel's drunken visit, but his words stayed with me like a poison I couldn't spit out. You'll regret this, Dad. I replayed it over and over, each time colder, sharper, more dangerous. My son had turned into a shadow of the boy I once carried on my shoulders. He was a man now, yes, but hollow, driven by envy and entitlement. Nothing more. I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my window felt like his return. Every ring of the phone made my heart jump. But rather than letting fear consume me, I let it sharpen me. I strengthened everything. I placed the deed to the house in Lily's name directly. I moved the last of my savings into an account she alone could access. I even had Reynolds prepare a trust that would activate the moment I died, one that Daniel couldn't contest, without exposing his debts and history of reckless spending. It wasn't enough to disinherit him. I had to make him powerless. Then the calls started. First, a single voicemail, Daniel's voice, calm, almost too calm. Dad, I just want to talk. Maybe we can work this out. Family is all we've got, right? Then another, more desperate. You're letting her take everything. You're choosing her over me. Don't you understand? I'm your blood, not Lily. She's just... He cut himself off before finishing, but I knew what he wanted to say. She's just a replacement. My hand trembled as I listened. Replacement? Lily was my salvation, the daughter who stayed when everyone else left. And then came the third voicemail. You think you've won, old man, but you've underestimated me. Paperwork doesn't stop people like me. You know where I live. You know what I can do. Keep your doors locked. That was when I realized Daniel wasn't going to wait for inheritance anymore. He was preparing to take by force what he couldn't get legally. That night I sat across from Lily at the kitchen table, the only light between us a dim lamp. I wanted to shield her, to keep her safe by keeping her in the dark. But she wasn't a child anymore. Dad, she whispered, her voice steady but her eyes searching mine. He's not going to stop, is he? I swallowed hard. No, he's not. So what do? I looked at her strength, her courage, and for the first time I felt the faintest flicker of hope. She wasn't fragile, she wasn't blind, she was ready to fight beside me, and in that moment, the revenge stopped being mine alone. It became ours, but I knew the war wasn't over. No, Daniel was only just beginning to show his teeth. It happened on a Thursday evening. Lily had gone upstairs early, exhausted from work, while I sat in the living room with the television flickering faintly. For a moment, the house felt peaceful. Quiet, safe. Then I heard it. Glass shattering at the back of the house. My chest tightened. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't the wind. I reached for the cane beside my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps came next. Heavy, uneven, but deliberate. Someone was inside. Dad, a voice whispered from the dark. Hallway? My blood froze. Daniel. He stepped into the dim light, his face pale, his eyes sunken, his hands trembling. He wasn't drunk this time. He wasn't even shouting. That made it worse. You left me no choice, he said softly, almost eerily calm. You locked me out of everything. You humiliated me. You made me nothing, so now I'll take what's mine. Nothing is yours, I replied, my voice low but steady. You threw it all away. He shook his head slowly, like a wounded animal. No, Dad. You threw me away. Before I could respond, he pulled something from his jacket, a crowbar, rusted but sharp enough to make my stomach drop. At that exact moment, Lily's footsteps echoed on the stairs. She froze when she saw him, her breath catching in her throat. Daniel turned toward her, his face twisting with something between anger and desperation. She doesn't deserve it, he shouted. She doesn't deserve any of it. Daniel, stop! I roared, pushing myself up from the chair, my cane clattering against the floor. But he kept moving toward Lily. For the first time in years, adrenaline surged through my old body like fire. I stepped between them, my arms spread wide. If you want to hurt her, I said, my voice shaking but firm, you'll have to go through me first. Daniel's eyes flickered. For a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the son who once hugged me tight after nightmares, the boy who used to laugh at Christmas. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by something unrecognizable. His grip tightened on the crowbar, and then he raised it. The room seemed to stop breathing. Lily screamed my name. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst, but just as the crowbar came swinging down, headlights flared through the front window. Tires screeched outside, a car door slammed, and a voice shouted from beyond the porch, sharp, commanding, unmistakably familiar. Police! Drop it! Daniel froze, the crowbar inches from my shoulder. His chest heaved, his knuckles white. For a second he looked like he might still do it, but then slowly his arm fell to his side. 2 officers burst in, grabbing him before he could move again. Lily rushed to my side, clutching my arm, her face pale but unbroken. As they dragged Daniel out into the night, he looked back at me, his eyes blazing with hatred. This isn't over, Dad, he spat. It'll never be over. And for the first time I realized he was right. The inheritance war had only just begun. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. After the police took Daniel away, Lily sat beside me on the couch, her hands still trembling. I tried to steady her, though my own body shook as if an earthquake had passed through me. He had nearly done it. My son, my own flesh and blood, had nearly crushed my skull with a crowbar. If those officers had been a minute later, I wouldn't be here telling you this story. The next morning, I got the call. Daniel was being held in county jail on charges of breaking and entering, attempted assault and violation of a restraining order that hadn't even been filed yet. They wanted my statement, and I gave it in full detail. I didn't protect him. Not anymore, but that night as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something chilling. Jail wouldn't stop him. Even if he served time, even if he wore an orange jumpsuit for a year or two, he would come out the same, or worse. And when he came out, he'd come for me again. Or worse, for Lily. That's when the seed of a darker plan began to grow in my mind. You see, revenge is not always about fire and fury. Sometimes it's about quiet moves, made when no one can see, the kind that leave scars deeper than any blade. I spoke to Mr. Reynolds again, this time face to face. I asked him about ironclad trusts, about legal fortresses that could survive lawsuits, appeals, even blood ties. And then I asked about something else. What happens if Daniel tries to challenge my will in court? Reynolds adjusted his glasses, leaning back in his chair. If he contests Harold, it will expose his debts, his history, everything. It could ruin his name entirely. I sat silently for a moment, the weight of that truth settling in. Ruin his name. My son didn't care about love or family or loyalty anymore, but he cared about pride, about appearances, about not being seen as weak. And so, my plan shifted. I wouldn't just cut Daniel out. I would make sure that every attempt he made to claw back what he thought was his would only drag him deeper into the pit he dug himself. He wanted war. I would give him one, but on my terms. That night, I burned the last photograph I had of us together. Him as a boy on my shoulders, smiling under a summer sun. The ashes floated into the cold air as I whispered, "Goodbye, son." It wasn't grief anymore, it was resolve, because from that moment on, Daniel wasn't my son. He was my enemy, and enemies are dealt with. Daniel didn't stay quiet in jail. Within a week, I started getting phone calls, not from him, but from people I didn't know. Men with rough voices, hinting that Daniel still had friends on the outside, threats disguised as warnings. "Best if you reconsider, old man," one said before hanging up. For a brief moment, fear clawed at me again. He still had reach, even behind bars. But then I remembered, fear was exactly what he thrived on. No more. I doubled down on my plan. Mr. Reynolds and I spent hours in his office, poring over documents, rewriting clauses, and constructing a fortress so strong not even a seasoned lawyer could poke holes in it. Every asset I had was transferred into an irrevocable trust for Lily. My bank accounts, my retirement, even the deed to this house. It all became untouchable. But I wasn't satisfied yet. I wanted Daniel to feel the weight of his actions, not just legally but publicly, so I began to collect everything. Every voicemail he left me, every threat he spat, every reckless loan he took. I had Reynolds attach them all as records in the trust itself, meaning if Daniel ever tried to contest it, those files would be opened in court, exposed for everyone to see. It wasn't just protection anymore, it was a trap. Weeks later, Lily came home from work with a newspaper in hand. Daniel's name was in the crime section, his mugshot staring back at us. Local man arrested for break-in and assault attempt. I thought my heart would ache seeing my son's face like that. Instead, I felt something colder, a grim satisfaction. But Lily, she wasn't hardened like me. She sat across the table, staring at the paper, her hands trembling. "Dad, what if he gets out and comes back? What if all of this isn't enough?" I reached across, squeezing her hand. "Then he'll walk straight into his own destruction." "I'm not fighting him with fists, Lily. I'm fighting him with his own mistakes." Her eyes searched mine, and for the first time she understood. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was war. And then, almost as if fate wanted to test my resolve, I received a letter 2 days later. It was from Daniel, scrawled in angry handwriting, barely legible. The message was short, but sharp enough to slice through me. "You think you've beaten me, you haven't. I'll get out. And when I do, you'll wish you were already in the grave. I folded the letter slowly, slid it into the drawer of my desk and locked it away, not out of fear, out of patience, because I knew sooner or later he would be released. And when that day came, he wouldn't find a father waiting for him. He'd find a battlefield already set against him. Daniel was released on probation after 9 months. 9 months of silence that felt like the calm before a storm. I knew the Shiche day was coming, and when it finally arrived I felt no surprise, only a cold readiness. I watched him from across the street as he walked out of the courthouse, his hair longer, his face gaunt, but his eyes still burned with the same fire of entitlement. He spotted me instantly, and for a split second he smirked. Not a smile of reconciliation. A predator's grin. He didn't waste time. Within a week, he had filed a petition to contest my trust and will. Reynolds called me the morning the paperwork arrived. "Harold, it's begun," he said grimly. I nodded. Let it. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's arrogance became his undoing. His petition triggered the automatic disclosure of every record we had built into the trust. His debts, his threats, his drunken voicemails. The court read them. Lily sat beside me as the judge listened to Daniel's own voice, slurred and venomous. "You'll regret this, Dad. It'll never be over." Daniel's face turned crimson as the evidence stacked against him. His lawyer tried to object, but it was useless. The very act of his challenge had opened the floodgates, exposing every secret he had buried. The court dismissed his petition with prejudice, meaning he could never file again. And worse for him, the transcripts became public record. Within days, his employer cut ties. The landlord who had once been lenient demanded back rent. His so-called friends vanished, not wanting to be associated with his downfall. It was everything I had planned for. But Daniel wasn't broken yet. One night, I sat in the kitchen sipping tea, my phone buzzed. A new voicemail. His voice trembling, not with rage this time, but with something darker. "You think you've destroyed me, Dad, maybe you have. But if I can't have what's mine, then no one will, not even her." My blood froze. He wasn't talking about money anymore. He was talking about Lily. I played the message again, my grip tightening on the phone until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just revenge now. This was protection. I realized the war wasn't won yet. Daniel had lost everything material, but in that loss he had become something far more dangerous, and if he came for Lily, I would do what I had sworn never to do. I would end him. I didn't sleep after hearing that voicemail. I sat in the dark kitchen, the glow of the phone screen burning into my eyes as I replayed Daniel's words again and again. "If I can't have what's mine, then no one will, not even her." He wasn't after money anymore, he was after Lily. And that meant there could be no hesitation, no mercy left in me. For days, I prepared silently. Extra locks on the doors. Cameras installed around the property. I even gave Lily a small keychain alarm, though I told her it was just for safety. I didn't tell her how real the danger was. I couldn't burden her with the weight I carried, but inside I was waiting for Daniel to make his move. And he did. It was late, just after midnight, when the motion sensor camera pinged my phone. A figure in the backyard. Moving low, careful, determined. I didn't call the police this time. Instead, I walked to the study, opened the drawer where I'd kept the locked box for years, and pulled out the revolver I swore I would never use again. It was heavy in my hand, but so was the fear burning in my chest. The back door rattled. The glass cracked. I stood in the hallway, every nerve on fire as Daniel slipped inside. His eyes darted like a predator's, scanning for his prey. "Lily," he whispered, his voice low, chilling. "Come out, sweetheart. Daddy's home." Rage surged through me, stronger than fear. I stepped forward, raising the gun. "Take one more step," I said, my voice steady, "and it will be your last." He froze, turning slowly. For a moment, surprise flickered in his eyes, then he smiled, cold, mocking. "You don't have it in you, old man." Maybe once he would have been right. But not tonight. Tonight I wasn't just a father, I was a guardian, a man who had bled and sacrificed and suffered, only to be betrayed by his own blood. My hand didn't shake. "I already buried my son," I whispered. "You're nothing but a stranger wearing his face." He lunged. The shot echoed through the house like thunder. Silence followed, a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Daniel collapsed onto the floor, his hand reaching toward me, his lips forming words I couldn't hear, and then nothing. I stood there for a long time, the revolver heavy at my side, my breath ragged. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just came down slowly and wrapped her arms around me. We didn't speak. There were no words left. When the police arrived minutes later, I gave them everything. The voicemails, the threats, the years of proof that had led to this night. They didn't see a killer in me. They saw a father who had fought until the end, and maybe that's all I was. But as they took Daniel's body away, I looked at the empty space he left behind and felt no triumph, no victory. Only the cold truth. Revenge isn't glory, revenge isn't justice, revenge is survival. And I had survived.